"That child is yours," the healer told the Alpha King, and the entire room fell silent. The old woman's voice cut through the noise of the crowded hall like a blade through still water. Everyone in the room had been talking, laughing, moving around with cups of drink and plates of food. The ceiling was high above them, decorated with long cloth banners in deep red and gold, and the floor beneath their feet was polished stone that reflected the afternoon light coming through the tall windows. It was the kind of room that made people feel important just by being in it. And then she spoke. "That child is yours." She said it without raising her voice. She did not shout. She did not point with drama or wave her hand to get attention. She simply turned her head toward the far end of the room, looked at the young man standing near the east wall, and said those 4 words in the same calm, certain tone that she used when she told people their blood pressure was too high or that they needed more sleep. But the room heard her. Every conversation stopped. Every laugh died. Every glass was slowly lowered. People who had been walking stopped mid-step, and for a moment, the only sound in the entire hall was the soft creak of the building and the distant noise of birds outside the windows. King Edmund Carr stood at the head of the room. He was 52 years old, broad-shouldered, and used to being the most powerful presence in any space he entered. He wore a dark blue suit without a single wrinkle in it, and his expression on any normal day was one of controlled authority, not unkind, but firm. The face of a man who had learned long ago that showing uncertainty was something he could not afford. He had ruled the Northern Territory for more than 20 years. He had made decisions that affected tens of thousands of people. He had sat across tables from ministers and diplomats and never flinched. But when Adese spoke those 4 words, Edmund Carr flinched. It was small, just a tightening around his eyes, a slight change in the set of his jaw. If you were standing far away, you might have missed it, but the people close to him did not miss it. His advisor, a careful man named George Ola, who had stood at Edmund's right side for 15 years, saw it. Edmund's head of security, a quiet woman named Pearl Adu, saw it, and his wife, Queen Nora Carr, who was seated 3 chairs down from her husband and wearing a pale green dress that had cost more than most people earned in a month, saw it too. Nora did not move. She did not speak. She simply looked at her husband, and then she looked at the young man near the east wall, and then she looked back at her husband, and something in her face went very, very still. The young man near the east wall had not moved either. His name was Daniel Ashe. He was 19 years old. He had arrived at the palace that afternoon as an attendant to Adese. It was his job that day to carry her bag, open doors for her, and make sure she had water when she needed it. He had worn his best clothes, dark trousers, a plain white shirt, and shoes he had polished the night before, until they caught the light. He had thought, on the drive over, that attending a royal health ceremony was going to be one of the most interesting things he had done in his young life. He had not imagined it would go like this. Daniel looked at the old woman who had just spoken. He looked at the king at the head of the room. He looked at the dozens of faces now turned toward him, all of them carrying the same expression, a mixture of shock, confusion, and something that felt dangerously close to hunger, the kind of hunger that people felt when they sensed a story unfolding in front of them. He did not know what to say. He did not know what to do. He stood very still, the way he had always stood when he was confused, back straight, hands at his sides, face quiet. His mother had always said he went still when the world surprised him, the way a deer goes still in the forest when it hears something it doesn't recognize. And it was that stillness, that particular way of holding himself, that quiet posture, that made George Ola's breath catch in his throat. Because he had seen that posture before. He had seen it thousands of times, for 15 years, on the man standing at the head of the room. Adese lowered her hand slowly. She was 71 years old, small and straight, with white hair pulled back neatly, and a face full of lines that told the story of a long life spent paying close attention. She had been a healer for 43 years. She had trained under the best practitioners in the country, had studied in 2 different countries, and had spent 4 decades reading the signs that the body gave, in blood work, in bone, in the particular way that a person breathed, or held their shoulders, or moved their eyes, when they were telling the truth, versus when they were hiding something. She had not made this decision lightly. She had thought about it for months. She had argued with herself in the quiet of her house at night, lying awake and staring at the ceiling, and turning the question over and over. She had asked herself whether she had the right. She had asked herself whether the timing was correct. She had asked herself whether speaking would do more harm than staying quiet. But then she had walked into this hall and seen Daniel standing near the east wall, and she had seen Edmund Carr standing at the head of the room, and the distance between them, which should have been enormous, which should have felt like the distance between two completely different worlds, had felt to her like nothing at all. Because they looked, in the way that only blood could explain, like the same person at two different points in time. She had made her decision in the space of 10 seconds. Now she stood and let the silence do its work. Edmund Carr was the first to recover. He was a king, and kings learned, above all things, to manage their faces. He straightened slightly, and when he spoke, his voice was even, controlled, the voice of a man handling a difficult situation in a room full of important people. "Adaise," he said, and even those two syllables carried a weight of warning in them. "This is a public gathering." "Yes," Adaise said simply. "It is." She did not add anything to that. She did not apologize. She did not explain. She simply looked at him with the steady, patient eyes of someone who had spent a lifetime dealing with people who tried to manage the truth rather than face it. Edmund looked away from her. He looked toward Daniel, and something passed across his face then, something that the people watching could not fully name, but that they felt like a change in temperature in the room. It was the look of a man who was seeing something he had not expected to see, and who was very quickly doing calculations that he had never thought he would need to do. Daniel held his gaze. He did not look away. He did not smile, and he did not frown. He simply looked back at the king of the Northern Territory with the same steady, quiet attention that the king had always used on others, and Edmund Carr, for the first time in a very long while, was the one who looked away first. A murmur passed through the hall like wind through tall grass. It moved from person to person, low and urgent, and within 30 seconds, the entire room was vibrating with whispered conversations. People were looking between the king and the young man near the east wall, and they were drawing conclusions, and those conclusions were running across their faces like weather. Queen Nora Carr stood up from her chair. She did it quietly, without making a production of it. She simply rose, smoothed the front of her pale green dress with one hand, and walked toward the side door of the hall, at a pace that was perfectly controlled. Not too fast, not too slow. The kind of pace that said she was choosing to leave, not being driven out. Two of her attendants fell in behind her without being asked. Before she reached the door, she paused. She did not turn around to look at her husband. She did not look at Daniel. She looked at the middle distance, at nothing in particular, and for a moment, her face showed something that all the control in the world could not fully hide. A pain that was sharp and deep and entirely private. Then she walked through the door, and it closed behind her without a sound. The room felt different after she left, as if some kind of pressure had been released, or perhaps as if some kind of pressure had just begun. Edmund turned to George Ola. He spoke very quietly, the kind of voice that you had to lean in to hear, and the words he said were simple. "Find somewhere private. Take the boy there, and get Dr. Osei." Dr. Osei was the palace physician, the most trusted one, the one they called for things that could not leave the building. George Ola nodded once, and moved. Daniel did not resist when George Ola came to him. He walked with the older man through a side corridor that the public never used, past walls lined with old photographs and dark wooden doors, to a small room with 2 chairs, and a window that looked out over the palace garden. The garden was very green and very quiet, and looking at it felt strange, like the world outside had no idea what had just happened inside. Daniel sat down in one of the chairs and waited. His hands were in his lap, and he noticed that they were not shaking, which surprised him a little. He had expected to feel more. He had expected his body to betray the chaos that was going on inside his head, but he felt, oddly, very calm, as if some part of him had been waiting, without knowing it, for exactly this moment. George Ola stood near the door. He was a tall man, with a quiet face, and reading glasses pushed up on his head, and he kept looking at Daniel, with an expression that he was trying hard to keep neutral and not quite managing. "Can I get you something?" George asked. "Water? Something to eat?" "No," Daniel said. "Thank you." A silence settled between them. Outside the window, a bird landed on the edge of a stone fountain and stayed there, perfectly still, as if it too was waiting. Daniel looked at his hands. He thought about his mother. He thought about the phone call he was going to have to make, and what he was going to say, and how she was going to receive the words. He thought about the face of the man at the head of the room, the way those eyes had looked at him, the way they had pulled away. He thought about Adaize, who had brought him here as her attendant, and had not said a single word to him in the car about what she was planning to do. He thought about the fact that his entire life, every story he had ever been told about where he came from, had just been changed by 4 words from a woman with white hair and steady eyes. Was she telling the truth? Daniel asked. George Ola was quiet for a moment, then he said, "That is what we are going to find out." Daniel nodded slowly. He looked back out at the garden. The bird was still on the fountain. The water caught the afternoon light and broke it into small, bright pieces. Edmund Carr was still in the main hall. Most of the guests had been gently directed toward the outer rooms by palace staff, who had appeared efficiently and without fuss, the way well-trained palace staff always did when something went wrong in public. The room was nearly empty now. A few senior officials remained, people who had been at Edmund's side long enough to know that leaving without being dismissed was not appropriate. Edmund stood at the head of the room. He had not moved from his spot. His hands were behind his back, which was how he stood when he was thinking, and he was staring at the east wall where Daniel had been standing, as if the space where the young man had stood was still giving off some kind of signal. Adaize had not left the room either. She sat in a chair along the side wall, her bag on her lap, her eyes on the king, waiting. She had a talent for waiting. It was something she had developed over 4 decades of sitting across from patients who needed time to tell the truth. You could not rush people. You could only make it clear that you were not going anywhere. Edmund finally turned to look at her. He walked toward her slowly, each step deliberate, until he was standing a few feet away. Then he looked down at her with the full weight of his authority and said, very quietly, "You had no right." Adaize looked up at him without flinching. "No," she said, "I had every right. I have had it for 19 years. I simply chose today to use it." Edmund's jaw tightened. "Do you understand what you have done?" "Yes," she said. "I understand it better than you do. Because you have spent 19 years not knowing what you were carrying. I have spent 19 years knowing exactly what I was carrying, and I am tired of carrying it." He stared at her for a long moment, and then he said the thing that gave Adaize the first feeling of peace she had experienced in a very long time. "How old is he?" Edmund asked. She looked at him steadily. 19, she said. "He was born in the spring." Edmund said nothing. He looked at the east wall again. He was doing the math, and the math, she could see, was working out exactly the way she had known it would. "His name," Edmund said. It was not quite a question, and not quite a demand. It was the voice of a man who had just lost the ability to pretend he did not need to know. "Daniel," Adaize said. "Daniel Ash. He is a first-year university student. He studies engineering. He is here today because I asked him to accompany me." She paused. "He is a good young man. He is kind, and he is honest, and he works very hard. His mother raised him alone." Edmund was quiet for what felt like a long time. "His mother," he said finally. Adaize looked at him carefully. "You know his mother," she said. "You knew her a long time ago. Her name is Clara." The name hit Edmund like a stone hitting still water. She could see the ripple of it move across his face before he locked it down again. "Clara," he repeated. The word came out strangely, as if his mouth had not said it in so long that it had nearly forgotten the shape. "Yes," Adaize said. "Clara Ash. She was Clara Bennett when you knew her. She was a teacher's daughter from the village near the old university. She was 23 years old, and she loved you. And then one day she was gone, and you did not know why." Edmund turned away from her. He walked to the window at the far end of the room and stood with his back to her, looking out at the grounds of the palace. His shoulders were very straight. Too straight. The straightness of a man holding himself together by force. Adaize waited. After a while, without turning around, Edmund spoke again. "Is she well?" It was such a simple question. It was not the question of a king. It was the question of a man who had loved someone once and still carried the small, quiet ache of it, even after all the years, and the distance, and the silence. Adaize felt something soften in her chest. "She is well," she said. "She has had a hard life, but she has lived it with more strength than most people I know. She built a good life for her son, She did everything she was supposed to do. She paused. She never stopped being someone worth knowing. Edmund did not respond, but his shoulders dropped by just the smallest amount, and Adaize saw it, and she understood that it meant something she could not fully name. In the small room with the garden window, Daniel had stopped looking at the fountain. He was thinking, now, about a specific memory, one he had not thought about in years, a memory that had always seemed too small to matter, until this moment, when it suddenly seemed very large. He had been 9 years old. He and his mother had been watching a news broadcast on their small television, and the face of a man had appeared on the screen, a man being interviewed about a new development project in the Northern Territory. His mother had gone very still beside him on the couch, not the natural stillness of someone watching television, a different kind of stillness, the kind that came from recognizing something you had not expected to see. Daniel had looked at his mother and said, "Mama, do you know that man?" And his mother had said, after a pause that was just a little too long, "I knew him, a long time ago. Before you were born." He had not asked anything more. He had been 9. He had gone back to watching the television, and his mother had sat very still for the rest of the program, and then she had quietly gotten up and gone to the kitchen, and he had heard the tap running for a very long time. He had not thought about that memory again until right now, sitting in a small room in the Northern Territory Palace, with a bird on a stone fountain outside the window, waiting to find out if everything he thought he knew about himself was the beginning of a story that was about to completely change. George Ola's phone buzzed quietly. He looked at it, then looked at Daniel. "Dr. Osei is on his way," he said. "It will be about 15 minutes. Daniel nodded. "Okay," he said. He said it the same way he said most things, quietly, without drama. The same way George thought that the man he had worked beside for 15 years said most things. George looked out the window. The bird was gone. The fountain turned, and the water caught the light, and the garden was very green and very still. Outside in the corridor, a clock on the wall showed that it was 4:15 in the afternoon. 19 years of silence had lasted until 4:15 on an ordinary Tuesday, and now it was over. What came next was not yet clear. Not to the king, not to the young man in the small room, not to the woman who had spoken, not to the wife who had walked through the side door with her face carefully composed. What came next would take months to understand, and perhaps years to settle. It would require conversations that no one had yet found the courage to begin, and truths that had been held in private for nearly 2 decades, and a family that had no shape yet and would need to find one. But it had begun. 4 words had begun it. And in the room with the garden window, Daniel Ashe sat with his hands quiet in his lap and looked at the turning water in the stone fountain, and felt, beneath the confusion and the shock and the strangeness of it all, something that surprised him more than anything else. He felt, very quietly, the first small pull of something that might, in time, become relief. As if some part of him had always known that his story was larger than the one he had been told. As if some part of him had been sitting at a fountain all his life, waiting for the water to catch the light in exactly this particular way. He thought about calling his mother. He reached into his pocket and touched his phone, then let it go. Not yet. He would wait until he knew more. He would wait until he had something certain to say. His mother had held something inside her for 19 years, and she deserved to hear the full truth when it came, not the beginning of a question. He looked at the garden. He waited. And in the main hall, Edmund Carr still stood at the window with his back to the room, and the afternoon light came through the glass and fell across his shoulders, and the name Clara Bennett moved through his memory like a river moving through a place it had not been allowed to reach for a very long time. The name had lived in the back of Edmund Carr's mind for 19 years, the way that a particular song lives in the back of the mind. Not always present, not always loud, but always there. Something that could be triggered by an ordinary moment. The smell of a certain kind of evening air, the sound of a piano note in a minor key, the particular shade of light that came through a window just before the sun fully set. Clara Bennett. He had been 33 years old when he met her. That was before the title, before the full weight of the Northern Territory had settled on his shoulders. His father was still alive then, King Arthur Carr, a man with enormous hands and a deep voice, and the kind of authority that did not need to be explained, because it was simply present in the room with him. Edmund had been the heir. He had known from boyhood that the throne was coming. The way you know that a storm is coming before the rain starts. You can feel it in the air, a heaviness, a change. But he had also been a man of 33 in those days, a man who read books and ran in the early morning and liked the way coffee smelled even before it was ready to drink. A man who, if you had seen him sitting alone on a bench in the university gardens on a particular afternoon in October, reading a collection of poetry that he would not have admitted to reading in front of his senior advisors, would have looked quite ordinary. Tired, perhaps. A little distracted, but ordinary. Clara had sat down on the other end of that bench without asking. That was the thing he remembered first, and most clearly, even now. She had not asked if the seat was taken. She had not apologized for sitting. She had simply looked at the bench, decided she needed it, and sat down. She had a bag over one shoulder and a folder of papers balanced on her knees, and she had opened the folder immediately and begun reading, without looking at him at all. He had waited. He had turned a page of his book, though he had not been reading it. He had waited for her to notice who he was, and change, the way people always changed. The subtle shift in posture, the careful recomposition of the face, the decision about what kind of voice to use. It happened with everyone. He was used to it. It did not happen with Clara. She read her papers. She made a small note in the margin with a pen from her bag. She pushed a strand of hair behind her ear without looking up, and after about 3 minutes, she said, to the papers on her lap and not to him at all, "That book is better read indoors. The wind keeps turning the pages." He had looked at her. She had, eventually, looked up at him. She had level, careful eyes, the kind that assessed things quickly and accurately, the way the eyes of someone trained to teach often do. She looked at him with those eyes, took him in, noted who he was, and then looked back at her papers. "Don't let me disturb your reading," she said. He had been so surprised by the lack of performance that he had laughed. A real laugh, not the polite one he used at official gatherings. It came out before he could consider it, and it made her look up again, and this time she seemed slightly more interested. "I wasn't reading," he said. "I was looking at the page and thinking about something else." "That's not reading," she agreed. "What were you thinking about?" He told her. It was not anything important. He had been thinking about a decision he needed to make regarding a land dispute in the Eastern Quarter, and he was thinking about it the way you think about something you are not looking forward to. He told her the outline of it, without the official details, in the way that one person tells another person a problem, when they simply need to say it aloud to someone who is not involved in it. She listened. She asked 2 questions that were both more useful than anything his advisors had said to him about the situation in the past week, and then she went back to her papers. That was how it began. He found reasons to be near the university gardens. She was there often. She was doing a master's degree in education, working on a thesis about learning methods for children from rural communities. She had grown up in one of those communities herself, the daughter of a school teacher, who had believed with complete conviction that education was the only thing that could not be taken from you. She had carried that belief into every room she entered. It sat in her the way that principles sit in people who have actually tested them against real life. Not loudly, not as a performance, but quietly and completely. Over the course of 3 months, they talked on that bench, and on other benches, and then in a small tea house near the university that neither of them went to with other people. They talked the way 2 people talk when they have discovered that the other person makes their thinking clearer, not because they always agreed, but because each of them forced the other to say what they actually meant, rather than what they thought they were supposed to mean. He was careful. He told himself he was being careful. He was the heir to the Northern throne, and he had obligations that Clara did not have and could not have, and he knew, in the way that you know something uncomfortable that you cannot look at directly, that there were limits to what was possible. But the limits had not felt real in those months, or rather, they had felt real, but distant. The way the horizon feels real but distant when you are in the middle of a journey, and it is a beautiful morning. Edmund had not told his mother about Clara. He had not been ready for that conversation. His mother, the Queen Dowager Margaret Carr, was a woman of very specific ideas about what the throne required, and what the throne required was something she had spent 60 years protecting, with the focused dedication of someone who understood that kingdoms were not kept by accident. She was not a cruel woman, but she was a woman who had decided, a long time ago, that certain things mattered more than other things, and she had never been moved from that position by anything as imprecise as sentiment. What Edmund had not known, what he had not been there to know, was that his mother had found out about Clara on her own. One of the many quiet, efficient people whose job it was to keep the Queen Dowager informed, had brought her the information, neatly organized, with notes. Margaret had read the notes once, set them down on her desk, and made a decision in the time it took to refold the paper. She had summoned Clara. Edmund did not know this. He had not been told, and by the time he realized something was wrong, by the time Clara had stopped appearing at the bench, stopped responding to the messages he sent, stopped being available in any of the places where she had always been available, there was nothing to investigate. There was only silence. And silence, as Margaret Carr well knew, was the cleanest way to close a door. Edmund had looked. He had made inquiries, quiet ones, careful ones, the kind that a man makes when he is not quite ready to make a large noise about something, but wants to understand what has happened. He had been told, eventually, by someone who was trying to be kind, that Clara had left the city, gone south, that she had decided to pursue her work in a different location. He had believed it, or he had told himself he believed it. In the private part of himself, where things that were not quite right collected and stayed, he had not fully believed it, but he had been trained, all his life, to accept the information that was given to him, when the information was clean and neat, and did not require him to pull at threads that might unravel larger things. 3 months later, his father's health began to fail. 4 months after that, Edmund Carr became king of the Northern Territory, and the weight of what he had inherited settled on him like a mountain settles into the earth, slowly, completely, and without leaving room for the things that had existed before it arrived. He had thought about Clara less as the years went on, not never, but less. The thoughts had become shorter and quieter, the way certain kinds of pain become shorter and quieter, not because they heal, but because the person carrying them becomes more accustomed to their weight. He had married Nora 11 years ago. Nora was everything a king of the Northern Territory was supposed to want. Educated, composed, intelligent, from a good family, with connections to 3 of the most important governance institutions in the country. She was also a genuinely good person. Edmund was not a man who could have been comfortable beside someone who was not. They had built a real life together. They had 2 daughters whom Edmund loved without reservation. They had a home that felt, on most days, like a home, and not just a building where official things happened. He had not spoken Clara's name in 19 years. And now it was the only word in his head. He stood at the window of the main hall and looked out at the palace grounds. The evening was coming in slowly, softening the light into something gold and gentle that felt deeply at odds with the temperature inside his chest. A door opened behind him. He turned. It was George Ola. "The doctor has arrived," George said quietly. "He is with the boy now. The initial observation is complete. He says the visual indicators are—" George paused, choosing his words. "Very clear. He recommends a formal test, which can be done here, tonight, and the results can be available by morning." Edmund looked at him steadily. "Do it," he said. George nodded. "There is something else," George said. He hesitated in the way he only hesitated when he was about to say something he suspected Edmund would not want to hear. "Queen Nora is in her private rooms. She has asked not to be disturbed tonight, but she has sent a message." He held out a small, folded piece of paper. Edmund took it. He opened it. Nora's handwriting was very neat, very controlled. The way her voice was very neat, and very controlled. It was one of the things he had always admired about her, and which, at this moment, made the words on the page feel like they were written in a language that he was only partly fluent in. She had written, "I am not leaving, but I need tonight to think. We will speak tomorrow. Please do not come to me tonight." He folded the paper twice and put it in his breast pocket. "All right," he said. George did not say anything more. He understood, as he understood most things about Edmund Carr after 15 years, that there was nothing useful to add. Edmund walked through the corridor that led to the small room with the garden window. He walked at the pace of a man moving towards something he has decided not to run from, even though the running instinct is present. He had always believed that the correct response to a difficult thing was to go toward it, not away from it. He had believed this as a principle for most of his adult life. Tonight was the first time in a long time that the principle had required something of him personally, rather than officially. He stopped outside the door. On the other side, his son was waiting. The word arrived in his mind quietly and without ceremony. His son. He had not yet processed it. He was not sure he would be able to process it tonight, But the word was there, sitting in the space behind his breastbone, and it had weight. He knocked twice. The voice that answered was young, steady, not frightened. "Come in," said Daniel Ashe. Edmund opened the door. The young man was sitting in the chair near the window, and the last light of the day came through the glass and fell across him. And Edmund Carr looked at his son for the first time in his life, and felt every controlled, measured, managed thing inside him begin to come undone, very slowly at the edges. Daniel looked back at him. His face was calm. His eyes were assessing, careful, intelligent, the eyes of someone who processed what they saw before they responded to it. He did not stand up when the king entered. He did not look away. And Edmund, who had spent 30 years walking into rooms and having every person in them stand up and compose themselves and perform whatever version of respect they thought was appropriate, found that the young man's stillness was the most honestly respectful thing anyone had shown him in a very long time. He sat down in the other chair. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, the garden was going dark, and the fountain turned quietly in the fading light, and the evening settled over the palace with no interest at all in the enormity of what was happening inside it. Edmund Carr looked at his son. His son looked back at him. "I don't know how to begin this," Edmund said, and he said it plainly, without apology and without performance, in a voice that was quieter than his public voice, and more honest than he had been with most people in many years. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I have one question, and I need an honest answer." Edmund nodded. "Did you know about me?" Daniel asked. "Did you know I existed?" The question hung in the air between them. Edmund could have answered it in several ways. He could have given a diplomatic answer, a complicated answer, an answer that covered all the possible interpretations and left him some room. He had given answers like that for 20 years. He was very good at it. Instead, he said, "No, I did not know. I swear to you that I did not know." Daniel looked at him for a long moment. He was reading him, Edmund realized, the way people read people when they have learned, through experience, to be careful about what they trust. Then Daniel said, "All right?" Just that. Just all right. Not a gift, not a forgiveness, not yet, but a door left slightly open rather than shut, an acknowledgement that the conversation could continue. And Edmund Carr, who had spent 20 years being certain of almost everything, found that all right was enough for tonight. It was enough to go on. Clara Ashe had a habit, on the evenings when her mind would not quiet down, of walking to the end of her street and back. The street she lived on was ordinary. Brick houses on both sides, a few trees, a corner shop that closed at 9 and opened again at 6 in the morning. She had lived on this street for 14 years. She knew every crack in the pavement, every house with the light that stayed on late, every dog that would bark when you passed, and every one that would simply watch you go. She did not know, on the evening that Daniel called her, that her life was about to split into two clearly defined parts, the part before the phone rang and the part after. She was walking back from the end of the street when her phone rang. She looked at the screen. It was Daniel. She felt the small, automatic warmth that she always felt when she saw his name, the particular kind of warmth that only comes from a love that has cost something, that has been built out of difficulty and perseverance and the daily decision to keep going. "Hello, love," she said. "Mama." His voice was careful in a way she recognized. He used that careful voice when he was thinking very hard about how to say something. He had used it as a small boy when he had something to confess, and he had used it as a teenager when he needed to tell her something he thought she might not want to hear. She had always found it easier to be honest with than most people's dishonest voices. "What is it?" she asked. She had stopped walking. She was standing under the tree near her gate, and the leaves above her were moving slightly in the evening wind. "I need to tell you something," he said. "And I need you to listen to the whole thing before you say anything. Can you do that?" "Yes," she said. She already felt it in her bones, the way you feel a thing you have been waiting for, even when you did not know you were waiting, the way your body recognizes what your mind has not yet caught up to. He told her. He was methodical about it. He told her about arriving at the palace that morning as Adia's attendant. He told her about the ceremony and the crowded hall, and then the moment when Adiaze had stopped moving and said those 4 words across the room. He told her about the silence that followed. He told her about the small room with the garden window. and Dr. Ose, and George Ola standing near the door, with the expression he was trying, and failing to keep neutral. And then he told her about the king coming to the room at the end of the day, and the two of them sitting in the two chairs while the light went out of the garden, and the conversation they had had. Clara listened to all of it. She stood under the tree by her gate, and she listened, and she did not speak, not once, not even when the part of the story came that she had hoped and feared for 19 years would one day arrive. When he finished, there was a silence between them. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of two people who have said and heard something very large and need a moment to let it settle before they go any further. "Mama," Daniel said at last. "Say something." Clara breathed. She looked up at the leaves above her. They were dark against the sky, moving gently. She had looked at these leaves thousands of times from this spot. They were ordinary leaves, just leaves, but they had been above her head for enough years that they felt, in their small way, like witnesses. "I owe you an explanation," she said. "Yes," he said. He said it gently, without accusation. That was very much like him. He had always been able to say difficult things gently, which was something she had watched develop in him over his life, and had always been quietly grateful for. She asked him to give her a moment. She walked inside her house, through the hallway with its photographs on the wall. Daniel as a baby, Daniel at 5 in his school uniform, Daniel at 16 at the ceremony where he had won a prize for mathematics. She went to the kitchen and sat at the table. The kitchen was small and warm, and smelled of the dinner she had made earlier. The most ordinary room in a life that had been, until about an hour ago, reassuringly ordinary. "I'm sitting down. I'm listening," he said. And then, for the first time in 19 years, Clara Bennett, now Clara Ashe, told her son the true version of what had happened. She told him about Edmund first. Not Edmund the king, not the name on the news broadcasts and the official statements. Edmund the man she had met when she was 23 and he was 33. The man who had sat on a bench in a university garden and laughed at something she had said, without performing the laugh, without calculating it. She told Daniel what it had felt like to be known by that man, to be seen by him clearly, without the usual adjustments people made when they looked at her. She told him that it had been real. She wanted him to understand that it had been real. She told him about the invitation she had received, delivered by a man in a dark suit who had come to her flat one morning and handed her an envelope with her name written on it, in very correct, formal handwriting. She told him about the room she had been taken to, not the palace, a quiet building near the city center, a room with heavy curtains and very good furniture. She told him about the woman who had been sitting in the room waiting for her. She told him about Margaret Carr. She told him this part carefully, because she had had 19 years to understand it, and she understood it now without bitterness, which was something she was quietly proud of. Margaret Carr was not a villain out of a story. She was a woman who had decided that the throne of the Northern Territory was worth protecting, and that the best way to protect it was to control the variables that might threaten its stability, and that a young woman from a rural family without connections was a variable that could be removed cleanly if it was done quickly and without leaving marks. Margaret had been kind about it. That was the thing Clara had found most difficult to process. Not the order to leave, not the money that was offered and which Clara had refused, but the kindness. Margaret had sat across from her with a cup of tea and explained the situation in measured, reasonable terms, and she had looked at Clara with something that was not quite respect, but was close to it, and she had said, "You are clearly an intelligent woman. I hope you understand that I am not asking you to do this because I have anything against you personally. I am asking you because it is the correct thing for the territory and for my son." And Clara, who was 23 and pregnant and entirely alone, in a room with a woman who held more power than she could fully comprehend, had asked one question: "Does Edmund know?" And Margaret had said, "He does not know, and it is better for everyone if he continues not to know." Clara had understood what was being said. The offer of money was not a payment. It was a statement about how unimportant the transaction was considered to be. The polite tone was not kindness, it was efficiency. And the information that Edmund did not know was both a fact and a warning. Speaking to him about this would require going through Margaret first, and Margaret had just demonstrated what going through Margaret looked like. She had taken nothing. She had left the room, left the city, and moved south, to a town she had visited once with her father, where the school her cousin worked at was looking for a teaching assistant. She had rented a small room. She had kept her pregnancy private as long as she could. She had told no one who the father was. When people asked, she said it was someone who was no longer in her life, and she said it in a tone that did not invite more questions. Daniel had been born on a Thursday morning in spring, in a hospital where no one knew her name or her story. He had been small and loud and entirely himself from the first moment, and she had held him in the narrow hospital bed and made him a promise that she had spent 19 years keeping, that she would give him everything she could, and she would never let him feel that the part of his story she could not give him was a wound. But she had also made herself a different promise, in the same hospital room, after the nurse had taken Daniel to be measured, and she had been alone for a moment, with only the sounds of the building around her, that she would not tell him a lie. She had only told him one, that his father had died before he was born. One lie, chosen to protect him from the complexity of a truth she did not yet know how to explain. She had told herself she would tell him the truth when he was old enough to carry it. She had kept moving the line for what old enough meant. And now, without her moving the line at all, the truth had arrived on its own. She finished telling him. The kitchen was very quiet. She could hear the clock on the wall and the slight sound of the wind outside. "She paid you to leave," Daniel said. "It was not a question." "She offered," Clara said. "I did not accept." A pause. A pause. "Why not?" "Because accepting would have meant agreeing with her assessment of how much the situation was worth," Clara said. "And I did not agree." Another pause. "And you never told him," Daniel said. "Even after. You never found a way to tell him." Clara was quiet for a moment. This was the hardest part, not what had been done to her. She had made peace with that, or as much peace as could be made with it. The hardest part was this, that she had known, in the years that followed, that there were perhaps ways she could have tried to reach Edmund. Letters. Indirect messages. She had chosen not to try. Partly because of the wall that Margaret Carr had built between her and that world, and partly because she had convinced herself that moving forward was better than looking back, and partly, and this was the part she found most difficult to say, because she had been afraid. She had been afraid that if she reached Edmund and told him the truth, the machine that had removed her once would simply remove her again, and this time it would reach her son as well. She had been afraid of putting Daniel in the path of something she did not know how to protect him from. "I was afraid," she said. "I am not proud of being afraid, but I was." Daniel was quiet for a while. Then he said, "I'm not angry with you." She closed her eyes. "You might be, later," she said. "When you've had more time to think about it." "Maybe," he said, "but right now I'm not. Right now I just—" He paused. "I just need to know that you're okay. Are you okay?" Clara felt something break open in her chest. It was not a bad feeling. It was the feeling of something held for too long finally being allowed to breathe. She pressed her hand over her mouth for a moment, not crying, just containing. "I'm okay," she said. "I need tonight to think, but I'm okay." "I want you to come here," he said, "to the capital. I don't know what happens next, and I don't know how long any of it takes, but I want you to be here." She thought about this. She thought about the city she had left 20 years ago. She thought about the palace building she had seen on news broadcasts and had always looked away from quickly, the way you look away from something that contains too much feeling to look at directly. She thought about Daniel, sitting in a room in that palace, in 2 chairs, while the light went out of the garden. "All right," she said. "All right," he said. They stayed on the phone for a moment without speaking, and the connection between them, the particular wordless frequency that had existed between them since before he could talk, felt steadier than it had in a long time. "I'll come this week," she said. "Okay," he said. "Call me when you book the ticket." "I will." "Mama?" "Yes." "What was he like?" Daniel asked. "When you knew him, before all of it, what was he actually like?" Clara was quiet for a moment. She thought about the bench. She thought about the laugh. She thought about the particular quality of someone's attention when they are genuinely interested in what you are saying, when they are not performing interest, or managing it, or calculating what comes next. She thought about what it had meant to her, at 23, to be seen clearly by someone with the ability not to see her at all. "He was quiet," she said. He read poetry he was embarrassed about. He listened better than almost anyone I had ever met. He thought carefully before he spoke. She paused. He was kind, in the way that people are kind when no one is watching. A long silence. "Okay," Daniel said quietly. "Okay," she said. She stayed at the kitchen table after they hung up. She did not move for a while. The clock on the wall measured the time in small, regular sounds, and the wind moved outside, and the most ordinary kitchen, in the most ordinary house, at the end of the most ordinary street, held the weight of everything that had happened tonight, as if it were used to holding things that were too large for it. Which, in a way, it was. For 19 years, this kitchen had held everything that Clara Ashe had carried. Every decision, every compromise, every late night when the fear of having gotten things wrong had sat at this table with her. Every morning, when she had decided, again, to keep going. Every ordinary Tuesday that had been only and entirely an ordinary Tuesday. She looked at the photographs on the wall of the hallway through the kitchen doorway. Daniel in his school uniform. Daniel at 16 with his prize. She had done her best. She had always done her best. Now the story was moving again, the way stories do, when they have been held still long enough, and there was nothing to do but go where it was going, and hold herself well in the moving. She got up, filled the kettle, and put it on. She would need to call her sister tomorrow and tell her she was going to the capital. She would need to pack a bag. She would need to think about what she was going to say when she got there, and to whom, and in what order. But tonight, she would make tea. Tonight she would sit at the kitchen table and let herself feel the full weight of 19 years of silence ending, and she would not rush it, because she had learned a long time ago that some things needed to be felt properly before they could be moved through. The kettle began to heat. The clock on the wall continued its small, regular sound. Outside, the ordinary street was dark and quiet and entirely itself. And Clara Ashe, who had carried more than anyone knew, sat at her kitchen table and breathed, and for the first time in 19 years, felt the very first, very thin thread of something she had almost stopped expecting. The thread of what comes next. There is a particular quality of morning that comes after a night when nothing was resolved. It is not a peaceful morning. The light comes in the same way, the birds make the same sounds, the world presents itself with the same unremarkable face that it has always worn. But everything inside the person experiencing that morning is different, and the gap between the ordinariness of the outside world and the upheaval of the inside world creates a kind of pressure that builds quietly through every small, normal task. Edmund Carr felt this pressure from the moment he woke. He had slept for perhaps 3 hours. He knew because he had watched the clock on the wall of his private sitting room. He had not gone to the bedroom, had not wanted the formality of undressing and lying down as if the night were a normal one, and he had been aware of the hours moving past. At some point, without meaning to, he had gone under. He woke with his neck stiff from the chair, and the test results were sitting on the table beside him in an envelope, and his first feeling was not curiosity or fear, but something simpler and more complete. The certain knowledge that he already knew what the envelope would say, and that what he needed now was not confirmation, but direction. He opened the envelope anyway. The language was clinical, precise, the kind of medical writing that puts a coat of technical terms over a very human truth, but the conclusion was clear enough for anyone to read. Paternity confirmed, with a probability that amounted, in any honest reading, to certainty. He set the paper down on the table. He sat for a moment in the gray early light, with the sound of the palace beginning to wake around him, distant footsteps, a door somewhere, the low conversation of staff starting their morning, and he allowed himself a minute to simply exist in what this meant, not to plan, not to manage, just to feel it land. He had a son. His son's name was Daniel, and he was 19 years old, and he studied engineering, and he had his father's posture and his father's way of going quiet when the world surprised him. He had grown up on the other side of the country, in a small house on a street with a corner shop, raised by a woman with level, careful eyes, and a mind that Edmund had spent 19 years half-consciously carrying. He picked up the envelope and put it carefully back in the drawer of the table. Then he went to find Nora. She was in the small sitting room adjacent to their shared rooms, already dressed, already composed, with a cup of tea on the table beside her that she was not drinking. She looked up when he came in, and her face was a thing that he had spent 11 years learning to read, and what he read in it now was something that he wanted to fix, and knew that he could not fix quickly, and probably could not fix alone. He sat down across from her. "The test came back," he said. "I assumed it had," she said. "It confirmed." "I know what it confirmed," she said. Not unkindly, but with the edge that comes from someone who has spent a night building a wall around themselves that they intend to keep intact for at least a while longer. Edmund was quiet. Nora looked at him. She was 44 years old, and she was beautiful in the way that women are beautiful, when they have survived things and continued being themselves through the surviving. She had dark eyes and the kind of face that did not perform its emotions in public, which was something they had in common, and which had, over 11 years, been both a source of strength in their relationship and occasionally a source of terrible distance. "Tell me what you know," she said, "about her, about how it happened." "All of it," he told her. He did not omit things, and he did not soften things. He told her about Clara, about the bench, about the 3 months. He told her that it had been real, and he said it as an honest thing, rather than as a thing to wound her, because she deserved honesty more than she deserved management. He told her about the disappearance, the sudden silence, the messages that went unanswered, the sense that a door had been closed and locked from the other side. He told her what Adeze had told him about his mother's role. He told her that he had not known. He said it without qualification and without defense, because it was simply the truth, and she deserved to have it without decoration. Nora listened to all of it. She did not interrupt. She held her teacup in both hands, though she still did not drink from it. When he finished, she was quiet for a while. "Your mother," she said at last. "Yes. She did this." "She did." Nora looked at the wall. She had always had a complicated relationship with Margaret Carr. She respected Margaret. It was difficult not to. She had also always felt, in her clearest moments, that Margaret's love for Edmund was real, but that it operated through a kind of ownership that did not leave much room for Edmund to simply be a person, rather than a function. She had never said this to Edmund. There had not seemed to be a useful way to say it. "And the boy," Nora said, "Daniel. He is not a situation to be managed," Edmund said carefully. "He is a person." Nora looked at him. Something in her face shifted, slightly, barely, but it was there. "I know that," she said. "I am not asking about a situation. I am asking about a person. What is he like?" Edmund considered this. He thought about the chair near the window, and the way Daniel had looked at him when he walked in, the back straight, the hands still, the refusal to perform either warmth or hostility, just the steady, careful attendance to what was actually happening. "He is honest," Edmund said. "He is very calm. He asks direct questions, and he expects direct answers. He is not interested in what he is owed, or what the correct drama of the situation should look like." He paused. "He reminds me of no one so much as his mother." Nora looked at him for a moment. "And does he know about me?" she asked. "About our daughters?" "He knows I am married. He knows I have children. He has not asked about the details. He is being," Edmund searched for the right word, "careful. He is being careful about how much he asks for, which I think is something he has learned from a lifetime of not asking for things he was not sure he would be given." Nora set her teacup down very gently on the table. "I need more time," she said. "I need more time, before I can think about how to—" She stopped. She pressed her lips together briefly. "I am not going anywhere. I want you to know that. I am not going to be dramatic about this, or make it into something larger than it already is. But I need time to find my footing, and I need you to give me that." "Of course," he said. "And Edmund." She waited until he was looking directly at her. "Whatever happens with the boy, do it right. Do not make him wait on the margins while you decide how to handle the situation correctly. He has already waited 19 years, and he did not choose that, and the way you treat him now is going to matter more than anything else you do in this." Edmund looked at his wife. 11 years of marriage, and she still, sometimes, found the exact center of a thing in a single sentence. "Yes," he said. "You're right." She picked up her teacup again. "Go and have breakfast," she said. "You look like you haven't slept." "I haven't." "Go." He went. Daniel had also not slept much, though for different reasons. He had spent most of the night lying in the guest room that the palace staff had quietly prepared for him. A room that was larger and better furnished than any room he had ever slept in, with sheets that were smooth and heavy, and a window that looked out over the same garden that he had spent the previous afternoon staring at. He had lain on his back and looked at the ceiling, and he had done what he always did when he was processing something complicated. He had broken it into its parts and looked at each part separately. The first part was the simplest. There was a test, and the test would say what it was going to say, and whatever it said would be the truth, and the truth could be worked with. The second part was harder. His mother had kept this from him, and he needed to understand that without being angry about it, in a way that was unfair. She had been 23, and entirely alone, and facing a level of institutional power that most people would not have been able to stand up to at any age. What she had done, leaving, building a life, protecting him from the complexity of a story she did not yet know how to tell, came from love. That was clear. It was still a loss, the knowledge of all the years he had existed without the full picture of his own history. But the loss was not her fault, and he was not going to let the loss become a wall between them. The third part was the most complicated, and he lay with it the longest. The man in the chair across from him, with the careful eyes and the quiet voice, who had said "I did not know" in a way that Daniel had believed. Not because the man was charming or powerful, or because Daniel was susceptible to impressive people, but because the weight in the man's voice when he said it was the weight of someone carrying something true, not performing something calculated. Daniel had spent 19 years developing an accurate sense for the difference. His mother had raised him on her own, which meant that he had grown up watching one person carry more than they should have, and he had learned to read the signs of genuine strain versus performed weakness. Edmund Carr was genuinely carrying something. Edmund Carr had not known. That did not make everything simple. It did not clean up 20 years of silence, or make the missing time less missing. But it was something to stand on. A floor, not yet a house, but something solid enough to begin from. He got up before 6, and looked out the garden window. The morning light was thin and new, and the fountain was already running, and the garden was very green and very still, and the ordinariness of it felt, after the strangeness of the previous day, almost kind. He called his mother. She answered on the second ring, which told him she had been awake. "Did you sleep?" he asked. "A little," she said. "Did you?" "A little." A comfortable silence. "The test came back," he said. "I don't have the results yet, but I expect I'll hear soon." "Daniel," she said. "Yes." "Whatever the test says," she paused, "I need you to know that my love for you has nothing to do with biology, and it has nothing to do with this story. I loved you before you had any story at all. I loved you when you were 3 hours old, and you had not done a single thing to earn it." He was quiet for a moment. "I know that," he said. "I have always known that." "Okay," she said. "Okay." By mid-morning, when Georgiola came to the guest room and told Daniel quietly that the test results had confirmed the paternity, Daniel received the information the way he received most information, steadily, without drama, with the focused attention of someone who knows that the feeling will come later, and that there is work to do now. "All right," he said. "What happens next?" Georgiola looked at him with an expression that contained, for just a moment, something warmer than the careful neutrality he had maintained since the previous afternoon. "The king would like to meet with you this morning," George said. "Properly, without the pressure of yesterday. He wants to talk." "I would like that," Daniel said. "There is also—" George hesitated. "The matter of the Queen Dowager. She has requested a meeting as well." Daniel looked at him. "Who is the Queen Dowager?" he asked. George was quiet for a moment. "She is the king's mother," he said carefully. "She has been aware of your existence, it seems, for rather longer than the king has." Daniel was very still for a moment. Then he said, "I'll meet with the king first." "Yes," George said. "That seems wisest." Outside the window, the morning had moved fully into itself, and the palace was alive with the sound and motion of a day beginning. People moved through corridors, cars moved along the drive, birds moved through the bright air above the garden. The world conducted itself in its usual way, with the usual indifference to individual crises and discoveries and revelations. Daniel Ashe looked at it through the glass and felt, with the same quiet certainty that had been growing in him since the previous afternoon, that whatever was coming, he was ready to face it. He was his mother's son. He had learned, from her example, that you did not need everything to be resolved, before you could stand up and go forward. You only needed enough ground beneath your feet to take the next step. He took a breath. He went to find the king. Adayeze sat in her home study on the morning after the ceremony, with a cup of tea going cold on the desk beside her, and she looked at the wall where she kept the photographs. There were many of them, patients she had known over the years who had given her their pictures as tokens of gratitude, family members, old colleagues from the years when she had practiced in the Northern University Hospital, a few from her travels. She could name every face in every photograph. She had that kind of memory, the kind that held people firmly, that did not let go of faces, even when the names of streets and the dates of events had long since faded. Near the bottom right corner of the wall, half hidden behind a photograph of two colleagues at a conference, was a small photograph that she had not moved in 19 years. It was a picture of Clara Bennett, taken at a gathering at the university, the year they had first met. Clara was laughing in the photograph, her head turned slightly to one side, her eyes caught in the mid-second of genuine amusement. She looked entirely herself. That was what Adayeze had always thought when she looked at it. Clara had been entirely herself, in a way that was, in Adayeze's experience, surprisingly rare. She had been Clara's mentor at the university, not in any formal sense. Adayeze had been a visiting practitioner working with the university health services, and Clara had been a graduate student in education, and their paths had crossed at a lecture series on community health in rural communities. But they had connected in the way that two people connect when they are both paying close attention to the same things, and the connection had deepened over the years, in the unhurried way that friendships deepen when the people involved have the patience to let them. Clara had told her about Edmund. She had told her in stages, the way people tell things, they are still working out how to feel about. First, she had mentioned a man she had been spending time with. Then she had described him more clearly, and Adayeze, who moved in the circles that knew the royal family, had understood who he was, from the description before Clara said the name. Then, one evening in Adayeze's sitting room with tea and rain against the windows, Clara had told her everything. Adayeze had listened carefully. She had not offered immediate opinions. She had learned, over decades of being a healer, that people's stories needed to be heard fully before they were responded to, and that the most useful thing a listener could do was often simply to make the space for the telling large enough that nothing needed to be left out. When Clara had finished, Adayeze had said, "What do you want?" Clara had been quiet for a moment. "I want it to be simpler than it is," she said. "But since it isn't simple, I want to handle it honestly." "That is a good answer," Adayeze said. And then Clara had disappeared, and Adayeze had only learned what had happened some weeks later, when she had managed to find Clara's new address through careful, indirect inquiry, and had written a letter, and Clara had written back. The letter from Clara was 3 pages long, handwritten, very honest, and contained at the end of it a request. "Please do not tell Edmund, not yet, perhaps never. Let me find my feet first. Let me figure out what I can carry, and what I cannot." Adayeze had honored that request for 19 years. She had watched the situation from a careful distance. She had stayed in occasional contact with Clara. Letters at first, then phone calls, then, in the last few years, occasional visits when Clara came north, for professional reasons, and they found a few hours to sit in Adayeze's study with tea and catch up on the accumulated time. She had watched Daniel grow up in photographs and in Clara's descriptions, and she had formed, over the years, a clear picture of a young man who was remarkable in the way that quiet people are sometimes remarkable, deeply, without advertising it. She had also, without being asked to and without saying it to anyone, watched Edmund Carr. She had watched him become king. She had watched him make decisions, some that she agreed with, some that she thought were wrong, all of which told her something about who he was and how he thought. She had watched him marry Nora, and she had seen, at the public ceremony and at the events where both of them were present, that the marriage was a real one, not a performance. Real. She had filed this information away with the other information she carried. And she had watched Daniel grow into a young man who moved through the world with a certain quality that she had only ever seen in one other person, and the accumulation of 19 years of watching had finally become more weight than she could continue carrying without action. She had told Clara, before bringing Daniel to the ceremony, she had not asked permission. She was not certain Clara would have given it, and she had believed that permission was not the right category for this decision, but she had told her. She had driven to Clara's town 3 weeks before the ceremony, and sat with her in the kitchen at the table, with the clock on the wall, and she had told Clara what she intended to do. Clara had been very still for a long time. Then she had said, "You're going to tell him?" "Yes." "At the ceremony?" "Yes." "With all those people there?" "Yes." Adaeze had paused. "Clara, I have thought about this more carefully than I have thought about almost anything in my life. I know there are ways to do this that would be more private. But I have watched the two of them nearly meet, several times over the years, without ever actually meeting. And I have watched the weight of this secret grow heavier, with every year that passes. And I believe that the only thing powerful enough to break through everything that has been built around this story is something that cannot be undone, or managed, or quietly rerouted. If I tell Edmund privately, his handlers will manage it. If I tell the palace physician privately, there will be protocols. If I write a letter, it will be intercepted. I need a room full of witnesses." Clara had not agreed easily. They had talked for 2 hours. Clara had raised every objection that needed to be raised, and Adaeze had answered them honestly, including the ones where her answer was, "I do not know how it will go." She had not pretended to certainty she did not have. At the end, Clara had said, "If Daniel agrees to come with you, I will not stop it." Adaeze had called Daniel and asked him if he would attend the ceremony as her attendant. He had said yes, without knowing why she was asking. She had not told him. She had considered telling him and had decided against it, partly because she did not want to place the decision on his shoulders before he had any context for it, and partly because she had thought his genuine, unperformed reaction to the revelation would matter, in the room, in a way that a rehearsed one would not. She had not fully anticipated the depth of her own emotion when she had walked into the hall and seen them both. The moment she had seen Daniel near the east wall, and Edmund at the head of the room, all the calculations and the plans and the careful thinking had become secondary to something much more immediate, the simple, overwhelming recognition that these were two people who belonged to each other, and who had been kept apart by a decision that was not theirs, and that the keeping was ending today. She had spoken without drama, without theater, just the truth, said clearly, into a room full of witnesses. Now she sat in her study, and drank her cold tea, and looked at the photograph of Clara laughing, and she felt, beneath the tiredness and the residual tension of the previous day, a deep and settled peace. She was 71 years old. She had been keeping other people's truths for so long that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to release one. It felt, she thought, like breathing more easily, like a room that had been stuffy for years and had finally been given an open window. Her phone rang. She looked at it. "Clara." She answered. "How are you?" Adaeze said. "Complicated," Clara said, "but all right." A pause. "Daniel called me last night. He told me about the meeting. About the king coming to the room." "Yes. He says." Clara stopped. She took a breath. "He says the king told him he didn't know, that he swears he didn't know." "I believe him," Adaeze said. "I have believed it for 19 years. It was never Edmund's decision. He did not know you were pregnant when you left. Your leaving was arranged without his knowledge." A silence. "I know," Clara said. "I know. I have always known that, in the part of me that is honest about it. It was easier, sometimes, to let the anger settle in Edmund's direction rather than his mother's, because his mother was someone I could not afford to be angry at. He was safer to be angry at." "That is very human," Adaeze said. "It is not very fair," Clara said. "No, but it is very human." Another pause. "I'm going to the capital," Clara said. "This week. Daniel asked me to come." Adaeze felt something warm move through her. "Good," she said simply. "I don't know how to." Clara paused. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do when I get there. I don't know what the shape of this is. I don't know what Edmund—" "You are not supposed to know yet," Adaeze said. "You are supposed to go. The shape will come later. Right now you just need to be present for your son." A long silence. When Clara spoke again, her voice was quieter, younger somehow, the way voices become when the person speaking has lowered their guard. "Adaeze," she said. "Yes. I am afraid." "I know," Adaeze said. "That is fine. Be afraid. Go anyway. It was the same thing she had said to Clara 20 years ago, when Clara had been 23, and standing at the edge of a decision about what kind of life she was going to build. It had been good advice then. She believed it was still good advice now. Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Okay. Okay," Adaisi said. After the call ended, Adaisi sat for another moment in her study. The morning had moved fully into itself now. The light on the wall of photographs was brighter, warmer, and the faces in the pictures looked back at her with the patient, accumulated presence of people who had mattered and been remembered. She looked at the small photograph of Clara laughing. She had kept that secret for 19 years. She had spoken 4 words. And now the story was moving again, under its own weight, in the direction that it had always been going. The direction of the truth, which was the only direction that any story could ultimately be kept from forever. She picked up her tea. It was cold, but she drank it anyway. Then she got up, rinsed the cup, and began the ordinary business of a morning that felt, somehow, lighter than any morning in recent memory. Outside her window, the city of the Northern Territory went about its business. Children went to school, people opened shops, cars moved through streets. The palace sat on its hill, with its banners, and its high windows, and its complicated interior, and somewhere inside it, a young man and a king were finding out how to speak to each other, and a woman, in a kitchen in a town 2 hours south, was packing a bag. Adaise dried her hands on a cloth and looked out the window. She had done, she thought, what she had come to do. The rest was theirs to carry now, and they would. She believed that. The room where Edmund Carr and Daniel Ashe met for the second time was smaller and more private than the one they had sat in the night before. It was a room that Edmund used for reading, books along 3 of the 4 walls, a desk that was always slightly messy, in a way he had never bothered to correct, because no one important came in here, 2 chairs by the window, that looked not over the garden, but over the wide, wooded land to the east, that stretched toward the horizon, and was, in the mornings, lit by the kind of light that made the trees look like they were made of something finer than wood. George Ola had brought Daniel there, and then left without being asked. He had developed, over the past 24 hours, a quiet understanding of when his presence was helpful, and when it was simply something to be worked around. Daniel came in and looked at the room, the books first, then the window, then Edmund. Edmund gestured toward the chairs. "Sit," he said. He almost said please, but stopped. It felt too formal, too much like a host speaking to a guest. And Daniel was not a guest. He was not exactly anything yet, in the vocabulary that Edmund had available, but he was not a guest. Daniel sat. He looked at the books without comment, but the quality of his attention when he did it told Edmund something. "Do you read much?" Edmund asked. "Yes," Daniel said. "Whatever I can find. I like history. And engineering, obviously, now that I am studying it, but also other things." "What kinds of other things?" Daniel thought for a moment. "I like accounts of how things were built," he said. "Not just physical things, political things, communities, how they found a shape. The decisions people made about what to keep and what to change." Edmund looked at him. "I was like that," he said. "I still am, to some degree." A silence. It was not uncomfortable. Both of them were people who did not fill silences out of nervousness. "I have read the test results," Edmund said. "George Ola told me they came back," Daniel said. "Yes." Edmund looked at him. "I want to say something to you. Not as a king, not as a public figure, just as a person talking to another person." Daniel was listening. His face was attentive. "I did not know about you," Edmund said. "I want to say it again, clearly, because I think it matters that you hear it more than once. I did not know your mother was pregnant when she left. I did not know she had been asked to leave. I thought she had made a choice to go, and I accepted that information, because I did not know to question it, and because I was young enough and proud enough not to dig into it the way I perhaps should have." He paused. "None of that is an excuse for what you grew up without. I am not offering it as an excuse. I am offering it as the truth of what happened, because you deserve the full truth, and not a managed version of it." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "I know," he said. "I believe you." Edmund was surprised, despite himself, by the directness of it. You believe me, he repeated. Yes, Daniel said. I spent last night thinking about it. I looked at how you reacted in the hall yesterday, and I listened to how you spoke last night, and I thought about what it would look like if you were lying, and this does not look like that. He paused. I have grown up around people who did not have much, people who did not have powerful friends or important connections, people who lied sometimes, because they needed to. I learned to tell the difference. Edmund looked at his son for a long moment. Your mother raised you well, he said. She did, Daniel said simply. I would like to. Edmund stopped. He was trying to find the right words for something that he did not yet have the right words for. I would like to know you, he said at last. That is the only thing I am certain of right now. Everything else is complicated and will take time to work out. But knowing you, that I am certain I want. Daniel looked at him. That is a reasonable place to start, he said. But I need something from you first. Tell me. My mother, Daniel said. Whatever happens between you and me, and I am open to finding out what that is, I am willing to try. My mother is part of this story. She is not a problem to be managed. She is not a detail that gets handled discreetly. She is coming to the capital this week, and I would like her to be treated as a person who deserves acknowledgement. Not as a public figure, not officially, just as a person. Edmund was very still. Of course, he said. And your mother, Daniel said. He said it without heat, but with a precision that made it clear he was not going to avoid the subject. I know what she did. Adaize told me enough, and my mother told me the rest last night. I am not going to walk into this building and pretend that did not happen. Edmund met his eyes. No, Edmund said. I would not ask you to. Daniel nodded. Then I think we can talk, he said. And they did. They talked for an hour, then 2. They talked about small things at first. Edmund asked about Daniel's engineering program, and Daniel described it with the quiet enthusiasm of someone who genuinely loves the problem-solving that their discipline requires. He talked about structures and forces and the way that things held together, and Edmund listened and asked questions, and the questions he asked were the right ones, and Daniel noticed that and filed it away. Edmund talked, tentatively at first, about the territory he governed, not the politics of it but the land itself, the particular character of the North, the kind of light it had in winter. Daniel asked about the history. Edmund brought a book down from the shelf and opened it to a map, and for a moment they were simply 2 people leaning over a book, which was perhaps the most ordinary thing either of them had done in the past 24 hours. At some point, George Ola brought in 2 cups of tea without being asked, and left again. At some point, the morning became afternoon. They did not resolve everything. They did not even come close to resolving everything. There were 19 years to account for, and a family structure to figure out, and the matter of Queen Nora and the 2 daughters who had a half-brother they did not yet know about, and the matter of Margaret Carr and what she had done, and what, if anything, could be done about it now. There were journalists who would eventually find out, because journalists always eventually found out, and there would need to be a plan for that. There were legal considerations, and official considerations, and personal considerations that would require careful, unhurried thought. But at the end of 2 hours, when Daniel stood to leave and Edmund stood also, there was something in the room that had not been there when they entered it. It was not yet a relationship, in any shape that could be named, but it was the foundation of one, the kind of foundation that is made not of grand gestures, but of 2 people agreeing to tell each other the truth, and then actually doing it. Edmund walked Daniel to the door. At the door, Daniel stopped and turned. One more thing, he said. Yes. You read poetry, Daniel said. Edmund was quiet for a moment. Adaize told you that, he said. My mother told me, Daniel said. She said you were embarrassed about it. Something moved across Edmund's face, something old and unguarded. I was, he said. I am less embarrassed now. Daniel almost smiled. It was very brief, a small movement at the corner of his mouth, there and gone. I read it too, Daniel said. There is less embarrassment on my end. And then he turned and walked down the corridor, and Edmund stood in the doorway of his reading room and watched his son walk away, and felt something arrive in his chest that he had not felt in such a long time that it took him a moment to name it. It was not happiness exactly. It was something quieter and more specific than happiness. It was the feeling of a door that had been locked for a long time, finally having the key turned in it. Not fully open yet, not yet ajar even, but the lock released, the mechanism moved, the possibility created. He stood there until Daniel had turned the corner and was gone. Then he went back into his reading room, sat down in his chair by the window, and looked out at the wooded land to the east. He did not know yet what shape this was going to take. He did not know how Nora would move through it, or how his daughters would receive the news when it came, or how Clara would feel when she arrived in the capital, or what conversation was waiting for him with his mother. But he knew, sitting in his reading room with the afternoon light coming through the window, that the thing he had spent 19 years not knowing he was missing had been found. Not claimed, not possessed, not resolved. Found. And he was going to handle it with the same steady, honest care that his son, had just shown him was possible. Margaret Carr was 84 years old, and she had lived in the east wing of the palace for over 60 of those years. She had been brought there as a young bride, and she had watched it change around her across 6 decades. Renovations, additions, the comings and goings of staff and officials and foreign visitors, and the ordinary parade of life, in an institution that moved at the pace of history, rather than the pace of a single person. She knew every room in the building. She knew its moods, its sounds, its particular silences at different hours of the day and night. She had known, from the moment she heard the sound of changed movement in the palace on the afternoon of the ceremony, that something had shifted. You developed that sense, in 60 years. The air in a building changed when something important happened in it. The change was difficult to explain. It was in the footsteps, in the quality of the quiet between conversations, in the way that faces were arranged when they passed each other in corridors. She had been in the East Wing when Adaize spoke. She had not been in the hall. She had sent her regrets for the ceremony itself. Her knees troubled her now, and the large hall required more walking than she found comfortable, and she had planned to join the gathering for the later, smaller portion of the afternoon. But she had been close enough to hear, through the particular acoustics of the building, the change in the sound of the room, and she had recognized the change. She had been carried to her private sitting room, and had sat there for the rest of the afternoon and evening, and she had not slept, and in the morning, she had sent a request to Edmund for a meeting. He had not come immediately. That told her something. In 20 years of his reign, Edmund had always come when she requested it, not always quickly, not always eagerly, but he had come. The delay was information. He came on the second morning. He walked into her private sitting room with a quality of stillness that she recognized in her bones. It was his father's walk, the walk of a man who has decided something and is carrying the decision calmly, without letting it show in his pace or his face, but with the weight of it present in every movement. He sat across from her. He did not speak immediately. He looked at her with the eyes she had watched develop from birth, brown and careful and very good at seeing what was actually there, rather than what people wanted to be seen. She had always been proud of those eyes. She had told herself, for 6 decades, that what she had given Edmund above everything else was clarity, the ability to see what was real and act on it without sentimentality. She was finding, sitting in this room with those eyes on her, that clarity was a complicated gift to give someone. "Edmund," she said. "Mother," he said. A silence. "I know why you are here," she said. She had decided, in the long hours of the night, that she would not begin with defense. She was too old for defense, and she was too clear-eyed, even now, not to understand that defense was what the guilty attempted, and she was not going to present herself as guilty in a way that required managing. She was going to present herself as someone who had made a decision and was willing to account for it. "Tell me," Edmund said. So she told him. She told him the same way she had done everything important in her life, directly, without embellishment, with the confidence of someone who had operated from a position of absolute clarity about her own intentions. She told him about the information she had received, about the meeting she had arranged, about the conversation with Clara. She told him what she had said, and what she had offered, and what Clara had declined. She told him that Edmund's name had not been mentioned in any official capacity, that no documents had been signed, that she had made the decision to keep him out of it, because she believed, at the time and for a long time afterward, that it was the correct decision for the territory and for his stability during the transition to power. Edmund listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, the room was very quiet. "You told her I did not know," he said. "Yes." You made the decision for both of us. Yes. You kept my son from me for 19 years. She looked at him steadily. I kept the complication from you, she said. I was keeping the territory stable. Edmund looked at her for a long moment. No, he said, that is the story you told yourself. But what you were actually doing was keeping control. You could not control what happened if you told me, so you removed the element you could control, and you left me with a version of events that you had edited. He paused. The territory was stable before you did this, and it was stable after. What you protected was not the territory. It was your own certainty that you knew better than everyone else what was required. Margaret looked at her son. She was 84 years old, and she had survived the death of a husband, and the weight of a regency, and the long management of an institution that most people romanticized and few understood. She had made hundreds of decisions across 6 decades, and she had made them with the conviction that she was always acting in the service of something larger than herself. She had not doubted, in the years since Clara, that she had done the right thing. But sitting in this room with her son, looking at her with those eyes, she felt, for the first time, the particular quality of doubt that comes not from outside challenge, but from the simple, clear-eyed recognition that a decision that had once felt clean had cost more than was acceptable. I kept you from knowing your child, Edmund said. It was not an accusation in the way he said it. It was a fact, stated plainly, without room to be rerouted. Yes, she said. He is 19 years old, Edmund said. He grew up without knowing his father. His mother raised him alone, with no support and no connection to the family whose blood he carries. He is a remarkable young man, and none of what he has become was owed to anything we did. It is entirely his mother's work and his own. Not because the territory required it, because you decided you knew what was right, and you acted on it, and you did not tell me. And now I am sitting in front of a son who is 19 years old and has his mother's intelligence and my posture, and has spent his whole life being told that his father died before he was born. Margaret looked at her hands. They were old hands, marked by time, the kind that had held many things across many years. I believed I was protecting the family, she said. You were protecting your idea of the family, Edmund said, which is not the same thing. She did not respond. I need you to understand something, Edmund said. I am not going to manage this privately and keep it from the people it belongs to. This is not a situation that gets handled and filed away. Daniel is my son, and he is going to know his father and know his family, whatever shape that takes. And his mother is coming to this city this week, and she is going to be received with the respect that she was denied 20 years ago. He paused. I am telling you this not to punish you. I am telling you because I need you to be clear on what is happening, and to make a decision about how you want to carry yourself through it. Margaret looked up at him. And if I disagree with your approach, she said. You are welcome to tell me so, he said. I will listen. I have always listened to you. But I am no longer going to act on your judgment over my own, when it comes to my family. Not in this. A long silence. Outside the window of the east wing, the morning moved through its ordinary processes. The light shifted. A cloud moved across the sun and then moved away. The birds in the garden went about their business. Margaret Carr sat in her chair and looked at her son, and she felt, beneath everything, a slow and difficult movement in the place where she kept the things she did not examine. It was not quite guilt. Guilt was something she had never had much practice with. It was something closer to recognition, the recognition that a decision she had made, from a position of absolute certainty, had turned out to be the kind of decision that looked different from every angle, other than the one she had been standing in when she made it. I made an error, she said. The words came out slowly, as if they were not accustomed to being said. In the method, perhaps also in the premise. Edmund looked at her. The boy, she said. Daniel. She said the name carefully, as if she were trying its weight. Is he? She stopped, tried again. Is he well? Edmund looked at her steadily. He is remarkable, he said. He is honest, and he is direct, and he has more grace than the situation requires him to have. He gets his grace from his mother. Margaret was quiet for a moment. I would like to meet him, she said. Eventually, if he is willing. That is not my decision to make, Edmund said. It is his. She nodded slowly. It was, he noted, The first time in his memory that she had nodded in acknowledgement of a boundary he had set, rather than simply proceeding past it. He stood. "I will keep you informed," he said. "I think that is fair. You are family, and this affects the family, and you are entitled to know what is happening." He paused. "But the shape of it, how it unfolds, who meets who, and when, that will be determined by the people most affected, not by management." "Yes," she said. He moved toward the door. "Edmund," she said. He turned. "Your father would have made the same mistake that I made," she said. "I want you to know that. I am not offering it as an excuse, but I want you to know that it was not only my mistake. The culture in which I made it was a culture your father and I built together, and you are right to change it." Edmund looked at her for a moment. "Yes," he said, "I know." He left. Margaret sat alone in her private sitting room. The light came in through the window and fell across the room in a long, pale band, and she sat in it and did not move. She thought about Clara Bennett, whom she had met once in a room with heavy curtains and had spoken to as if she were a complication requiring a solution. She thought about what Clara had built without her, what Clara had raised without any assistance from the family whose blood ran through that child. She thought about 19 years of ordinary mornings and difficult evenings, and the daily work of raising a person alone that Clara had done, steadily and without complaint, in a town 2 hours south. She thought about Edmund's face in this room just now, the way he had spoken, not with anger, which she could have deflected, but with the simple, level weight of someone who had decided to tell the truth, and was not going to be moved from it. She had given him that, she thought. For all that she had gotten wrong, she had given him that quality, that ability to speak clearly and hold to what was real. It did not make everything balance, but it was something. She looked at the window. The morning continued outside it. The palace went about its business. The territory went about its business. The world continued in the way that the world always continued, indifferent to the internal adjustments of the people moving through it. Margaret Carr, who had never in her adult life cried in front of anyone, and had not cried alone in more years than she could count, sat in her chair by the window, and felt something work its way up through her chest and sit behind her eyes. She did not cry. She had too much practice not to. But she sat with the feeling, which was perhaps as close as she had come in many years, to something that might eventually, if she let it, become a form of reckoning. Clara arrived on a Thursday. She came by train, which was something she had done very few times in recent years. The journey was long, and train travel required patience that she had in abundance, but did not always find comfortable to use. She sat in the window seat and watched the landscape change as the train moved north, the flat farmland giving way to hillier ground, the skies becoming wider and more dramatic, the light developing that particular quality of the north that she had once loved and had then trained herself to forget. She had forgotten some things successfully. That quality of light, she discovered now, was not one of them. Daniel met her at the station. He was waiting at the platform, and she saw him before he saw her. He was looking toward the train with the focused, patient attention he had brought to everything since he was small, standing very straight, hands in his coat pockets. She had looked at this person for 19 years, and loved him with the comprehensive, consuming love of someone for whom this person was the primary reason to keep getting up and going forward. And she looked at him now, standing on a platform in the city she had not been to in 20 years, and felt the love land in her chest with its full, familiar weight. He saw her and came forward. She walked to him, and they held each other for a moment, the way they did after any time apart. Firmly, briefly, without drama. "How was the journey?" he asked. "Long," she said, "but fine." He took her bag. They walked out of the station into the northern city. It was a cold, clear day, the kind of day that made the buildings look sharper and the sky more present. Clara had a moment, walking through the familiar grid of streets she had not walked in 20 years, of feeling two versions of herself at the same time, the 23-year-old who had known these streets, and the 42-year-old who was walking through them now. The sensation was strange and not entirely comfortable, but she held it without turning away from it. "Where are we going?" she asked. "I found a flat," Daniel said. "A short let, near the university. I thought it would be better than the palace guest house for you. More like somewhere you could actually breathe." She looked at him. "Thank you." He had thought about it, she knew. He had considered what she would need, the same way he had always considered what she needed when she was going through something difficult, quietly, without making it a performance, simply ensuring that the practical things were managed so that she could focus on the things that were not practical. The flat was on the third floor of a building near a park. It was small and clean, and had a kitchen table with 4 chairs, which was more chairs than either of them needed, but made the room feel less empty. Clara set her bag down and stood in the middle of the room for a moment, just taking it in. "How are you?" Daniel asked. "Strange," she said honestly. "Not bad, just strange." He put the kettle on. She sat at the table. Through the window she could see the tops of the park trees, moving slightly in the cold wind. "Tell me what it has been like," she said. "Since the ceremony. All of it." He told her. He was thorough. He had always been thorough when he described things. It was the engineering mind, the attention to components. He told her about the conversation with Edmund in the reading room. He told her about the books on the walls and the map and the 2 cups of tea that George Ola had brought in. He told her about Edmund's quality of listening, which was, and here Daniel paused and chose his words carefully, similar, he thought, to hers. Clara looked at the park trees. "He listens well," she said. "He always did." "He reads poetry," Daniel said. She looked at her son. "I told you that," she said. "You told him that he was less embarrassed about it now," Daniel said. He said so. His exact words were that he was less embarrassed now. Clara felt something shift in her chest. It was a small shift, a very old piece of feeling moving to accommodate something new. "What did you say to that?" she asked. "I told him I read it too," Daniel said, "and that I had less embarrassment on my end." Clara looked at him. "That is very much something you would say," she said. "I know," he said. "I got it from someone." The kettle boiled. He made tea. They sat at the kitchen table in the small flat near the park and drank it, and the city moved around them outside the window, and the north light came in at its particular angle and made the room warm, in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. "He wants to meet you," Daniel said. Clara held her cup. "Edmund?" "Yes," he said, his words, "that you are not a detail to be managed. He said you were owed acknowledgement." Daniel looked at her. I think he meant it. "What does acknowledgement look like?" she asked carefully. "I don't know yet," Daniel said. "I think it is still being figured out," but he said it without being diplomatic about it. He said it the way he says things that he actually means. Clara was quiet. "I am not the same person I was when I was 23, she said, "and I don't need him to. I don't need anything from him, Daniel. I built a life. I am not coming here to be given something I was denied. I am coming here for you." "I know," he said. "He knows that too," I told him. She looked at her son. "You told him?" In slightly more direct language, "Yes," Daniel said. She almost smiled. They sat quietly for a moment. "His wife," Clara said. "Queen Nora." "She is still in the palace," Daniel said. "She has not left. She asked for time. Edmund says she is. He says she is handling it with more grace than he had any right to expect." "That must be very difficult for her," Clara said. "Yes," Daniel said. He looked at her. "You have some compassion for her." "She did not do anything wrong," Clara said simply. "She married a man who had a history she did not know about. The history is not hers to carry." Daniel looked at his mother. "I told you," he said after a moment. "Told me what?" "That you are someone worth knowing," he said. He said it quietly, without drama. "I told him that." He agreed. Clara looked at her son for a long moment. Then she looked back out the window at the park trees. The light was changing as the afternoon came on, shifting toward the gold of later hours, and the trees moved in it the way trees always moved in it, which was without memory and without agenda, simply in response to what was present. She thought about the kitchen table in her house at home. She thought about the clock on the wall and the photographs in the hallway and the 19 years of ordinary mornings. She thought about the 23-year-old woman who had left this city with nothing and built something real from the nothing. She thought about what it meant to be sitting now at a different table, in a different kitchen, with her son across from her in the city she had been asked to leave. She was not the same person who had left. She was someone who had been built by everything that had happened since. And she was here. "All right," she said quietly. We will see what comes. Daniel nodded. Outside the window, the northern city went about its afternoon. The park trees moved in the wind. The light came in at its particular angle. And in a small flat, on the third floor of a building near a park, a mother and her son sat at a kitchen table and drank their tea, and the story that had waited nearly 20 years to continue began, quietly and without announcement, to move into its next part. The thing about truth is that it does not arrive all at once. It comes in stages, and each stage requires a different kind of courage, and the stages do not come in the order that you expect them to, and they do not feel the way you imagine they will feel when you are still in the preparation phase. Edmund Carr had understood this in the abstract, the way you understand things that have not yet arrived. In the weeks that followed the ceremony, he began to understand it in the specific, one conversation at a time. The first conversation that surprised him was with Nora. He had expected it to be difficult. He had prepared himself for it, had carried the preparation the way you carry weight you know is coming, bracing slightly in advance. But when Nora finally came to his reading room 3 days after the ceremony, she sat down in the chair that Daniel had occupied, and she looked at him with those dark, clear eyes of hers, and she said, "I want to understand exactly what happened. Not in general terms, specifically, walk me through it." So he did. He told her everything. The bench, Clara, the 3 months, the disappearance, his mother's involvement, the test results, the conversations with Daniel. He told it all in the same plain, unornamented way that he had told it to Daniel, because Nora had always responded to honesty better than to management, and because she deserved it, and because the time for managed versions of the story was over. She listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "Your mother arranged it." "Yes." "Without telling you?" "Yes." Nora looked at him. "And you are angry about that?" "Yes," he said. "I am." She nodded slowly. "Good," she said. He raised his eyebrows slightly. "I mean that," she said. "I am glad you are angry about it. I would be more concerned if you were not. What she did was wrong, and I think she is old enough and intelligent enough to understand that it was wrong, and I think you telling her so directly is the appropriate response." She paused. "I am not angry at you, Edmund. I need you to hear that. I was, the first night, not angry exactly, but I was disrupted. I needed time to sort through what was mine to carry, and what was not." She looked at her hands. "This is not something you did to me. This is something that was done to you, and by extension to everyone connected to you. You were also wronged by this." Edmund looked at his wife. "You are," he started. "If you say I am being remarkable about this, I will be annoyed," she said. He almost smiled. "I was going to say you are being honest," he said. "That is allowed," she said. A silence. "The boy," she said. "Daniel." "Yes." "I want to meet him," she said. "Not now, when things have settled somewhat, but I want to meet him. I think it is important that he knows he is not a complication to be kept at a distance." She looked at Edmund. "He is your son. He is not a problem." Edmund looked at her. "He is a remarkable young man," he said. "Then I look forward to meeting him," she said simply. The second conversation that surprised him was with his daughters. Amara was 15, and Isabel was 12. They were very different from each other. Amara was precise and reserved, and already developing the particular authority of someone who has learned that they do not need to raise their voice to be taken seriously. Isabel was warm and quick, and laughed at things that were actually funny, rather than things she thought she was supposed to find funny. Edmund loved them each completely, in the particular way you love people who are themselves and do not need you to find them impressive. He told them together, in the sitting room after dinner, on an evening when the household was quiet and there was time for the conversation to go wherever it needed to go. He told them plainly, because they were both old enough for plain, and because he had decided that he was going to be done with managing stories from this point forward. Amara listened to all of it, with the focused, slightly frowning attention she brought to anything she was working out. Isabel listened with her whole body, sitting forward on the couch, her eyes moving between her father and her mother, who was sitting beside Edmund with the quiet, steady presence that Nora had always brought to difficult moments. When he finished, Amara was the first to speak. "How old is he?" she asked. 19, Edmund said. Amara processed this. "So he's older than me," she said. "Yes." "Does he know about us?" she asked. He knows he has half-siblings, Edmund said. He does not know your names or anything specific. We have not gotten to that yet. Amara nodded slowly. She was working through the architecture of it. Edmund could see the new structure, how it changed the shape of the family, what it meant. This was very like her. Isabel said, "Is his mother nice?" Edmund looked at his younger daughter. "Yes," he said, "she is." "Is she coming here?" "She is already here. She arrived this week." Isabel thought about this. "Did she want to come?" she asked. "Daniel asked her to," Edmund said, "and she came." Isabel considered this. "That sounds like a nice mum," she said. Edmund looked at her. Something moved in his chest, some feeling that was too large and too full to name precisely. "Yes," he said, "she is a good mother." Amara had been quiet for a moment. Now she said, "Does he want to know us?" "I don't know yet," Edmund said honestly. "We have not discussed it. There is a lot to work out, and we are taking it at a pace that does not pressure anyone." He looked at his daughter. "What I can tell you is that he is kind and direct, and I think, when the time comes, he will be honest about what he wants." Amara looked at the wall for a moment. Then she looked at her father. "You would like us to know him," she said. It was an observation, not a question. "Yes," Edmund said, "very much." A silence. Isabel slid off the couch and came to sit beside her father. She leaned her head against his arm, which was something she had done since she was very small, and which she sometimes still did, when things were complicated, and she needed the simplicity of being beside someone she trusted. He put his arm around her. "Okay," Isabel said. "To the room, to the situation, to the new shape of things, just okay, simple and complete." Amara looked at them both, and then she nodded once, which was, for Amara, the equivalent of a considerably more expressive response. "Okay," she said. The third conversation was the hardest. It was not with anyone in the palace. It was with Daniel and Clara, in the small flat near the park, on a Saturday afternoon, when the light was good, and the city was quiet enough to hear itself think. Edmund had asked, through George Ola, whether he might come. He had not assumed. He had asked. Daniel had confirmed it with his mother, and called back to say yes. Edmund drove himself. He had not told his security team where he was going. George Ola knew, and that was enough. He parked 2 streets from the building and walked, and the walking felt, in its ordinariness, like something he had not done in a long time. Being in public without a purpose. Being in a street, just a person in a street, on the way to a place where something true was going to happen. He knocked. Daniel opened the door. They looked at each other for a moment with the brief, assessing look that had become, over the past weeks, their way of checking in. "Are you all right? Is this all right? Are we still going forward?" Daniel stepped back and let him in. Clara was in the kitchen. Edmund had thought about this moment. He had thought about it on the drive over and on the walk from the car, and he had been prepared, in the rational way that he prepared for most things, with a sense of what he was going to say and how he was going to carry himself. He had known that seeing her was going to be complicated. He had known that 19 years, and the full weight of what had happened between them and to them, was going to be present in whatever room they were in together. What he had not prepared for was how ordinary she looked. Not in a diminishing way. He meant ordinary in the sense of real. She was standing at the kitchen counter, and she had her back to him, and she turned when she heard him come in, and she was 42, and the years were on her face, and in the set of her shoulders, and in the very particular quality of stillness with which she held herself. The stillness of someone who had learned to carry a great deal without flinching, and she was also entirely herself. The same person, not the 23-year-old on the bench, not a figure from a memory, but Clara, who had become Clara Ashe, and was standing in a kitchen in the north at 42, and the recognition of her was complete and immediate, and landed in Edmund's chest, like something that had been looking for its place for a very long time. "Hello," she said. "Hello," he said. They looked at each other. Daniel had quietly gone somewhere else in the flat. He had the intuition for these things, that young man, the sense of when to be present and when to create space. "Sit down," Clara said. She said it in the same tone she had used on the bench 19 years ago, when she had told him to go inside, if the wind was turning his pages, not unkind, just direct, just itself. He sat. She sat across from him. I don't know what to say first, he said. Neither do I, she said, but I know what I want to say. Tell me. She looked at him steadily. I am not here to revisit what we had, she said. I need you to know that clearly. Whatever was between us is something that existed in a particular time, and that time is gone, and I have built a life that I am proud of, and that does not require anything from you. She paused. But Daniel is here, and Daniel is your son, and I would like to find a way for that to be handled honestly, without anyone being put in a position where they have to choose between loyalties or pretend things are simpler than they are. Yes, Edmund said. And there are things I would like you to understand about the years, she said. Not for your guilt. I don't need your guilt. But because I think the story you have been carrying about why I left is incomplete, and I think you deserve the complete version. Yes, he said again. Please. So she told him. She told him about Margaret Carr's summons, and the room with the heavy curtains, and the conversation that had been conducted with such polite, measured efficiency. She told him what had been offered, and what she had refused. She told him what she had understood about the message beneath the politeness, that the offer was not a transaction, but a demonstration of what she was worth to that family and that world, which was something that could be made to go away cleanly. Edmund listened. His face was very still. The kind of still that was not blank, but was very full. The contained quality of someone holding something that is too large for any expression to accurately represent. She said I would be better served by a life that was more suited to my circumstances, Clara said. Those were her words, more suited to my circumstances, as if I had wandered somewhere I had not been meant to go. Edmund was quiet for a long moment. I am sorry, he said. For what, specifically? She asked. Not aggressively. Genuinely. She wanted to know what he was apologizing for. For not knowing, he said. And for the family I come from having used its power against you. And for the years that were taken from all three of us because of a decision I was not asked about and would not have made. Clara looked at him. I believe you, she said. A silence. Your mother, she said. Have you spoken to her? Yes. And? She acknowledged what she did, Edmund said. She offered a justification, that she believed she was protecting the territory. I told her that the justification was a story she told herself, and that the truth was that she could not control the situation, and removed the element she could control. He paused. She did not disagree. Clara was quiet for a moment. She asked if she could meet Daniel, he said, someday, if he was willing. Clara's face showed something that moved through it and was gone. That is Daniel's decision, she said. Yes, Edmund said. I told her that. She looked at him. You are different from what I expected, she said. How so? I expected more management, she said. More. She thought about it. More architecture around everything. More careful handling of where things were allowed to go. I spent 20 years building architecture, he said. I have discovered recently that it only gets you so far. She almost smiled. Daniel says you told him you didn't know where to begin, she said. I said that, yes. He respected that, she said. He told me. He said it was the first honest thing you said, and it made the rest of the conversation possible. Edmund looked at her. He is your son, he said, in everything. Something moved across her face. It was not quite a smile, and not quite pain. It was something that contained both, the way most real things do. Yes, she said. He is. Daniel came back then, quietly, with 3 cups of tea, and he sat down at the table with the 2 of them, and for a while they sat in the small flat near the park, and the northern light came in through the window, and the city moved outside it, and they talked, carefully at first, and then with more ease, and then, for a short while, simply as 3 people sitting at a table together. It was not enough. It was not nearly enough to account for 19 years, but it was true, and it was present, and it was the beginning of something that did not yet have a name but was, unmistakably, real. And real was, Edmund had come to understand, the only foundation worth building anything on. There is a particular quality of resolution that does not announce itself. It does not arrive with ceremony or fanfare. It does not feel, when it comes, like the dramatic ending of a difficult chapter. It feels instead like the morning after a long storm. The air is cleaner, the world looks a little more itself, and there is a kind of quiet that is different from the quiet before the storm, which was the quiet of waiting. The weeks after Clara came to the capital were like that. Daniel continued his engineering studies. He took the train to the university each morning, and came back each afternoon, and in between he attended his lectures and worked on his problem sets, and had lunch in the student canteen with the two friends he had made in his first term, a young man named Owen who was studying architecture, and a young woman named Priya who was studying mathematics, and who had, since the ceremony, been reading news articles about the Northern Territory with a new and specific interest that she tried and failed to keep entirely private. "Are you going to tell them?" Daniel had asked her, after the third time he had caught her reading something on her phone that she quickly turned over when he approached. "Tell them what?" she said. "Whatever you have been reading about." She had looked at him for a moment. Then she had said, with the directness that he liked about her, "Is the Alpha King actually your father?" "King," he had said. "Not Alpha King. He does not use that title." "That is not a denial," she said. "No," he said. "It is not." She had looked at him very seriously for a moment. Then she had said, "Okay. Do you need anything?" "Tea," he said. "I always need tea." She had gotten up and gotten the tea, and they had sat together and talked about the problem set due on Friday, and it was fine. It was the kind of fine that comes when someone has understood that you are still a person, and not a headline, and has elected to continue treating you accordingly. He had not told Owen yet. Owen would find out eventually. Most people would eventually. But Daniel was not ready to manage other people's responses to the story, when he was still working out how he felt about it himself. He felt different things at different times. Some mornings he woke up and the situation felt very large and very complex, and it sat on his chest for a few minutes, before he could move it enough to get up. Other mornings it felt like simply the facts. These are the facts of my life. This is who my father is. This is the story that I have, and that I am going to have to carry, and it is more complicated than the story most people carry, but it is mine. On those mornings he got up easily, made tea, and went to his lectures, and the facts settled into their place and did not press on him. He had dinner with Edmund twice more in the weeks that followed. Once in the palace reading room, where they talked for 3 hours about things that had nothing to do with the situation, about the engineering of old bridges, about a book Edmund had been reading about the history of the northern coast, about the particular quality of university education that Daniel thought was working, and the parts he thought could be better. Edmund listened and asked questions, and pushed back on certain points, and agreed with others, and it felt, both times, less like an audience with a king, and more like two people who were genuinely interested in what the other had to say. Once they had walked in the palace garden. This had been Edmund's suggestion, and Daniel had accepted it, and they had walked for an hour in the late afternoon, while the light did its particular northern thing, and the fountain turned in the center of the garden. They did not talk about much of consequence on the walk, but they had walked beside each other, which was its own kind of thing. The particular communication that happens not in words but in proximity, in the shared experience of being in the same space and moving at the same pace. Daniel had told his mother about the walks. She had listened carefully, and then said, "That is how he thought," she said. "He always thought better when he was moving." Daniel had looked at her. "I do too," he said. She had looked at him for a moment. "Yes," she said, "you do." Clara had been in the capital for 3 weeks when the meeting with Margaret Carr happened. It had not been planned as a formal meeting. Daniel had been invited to the palace for tea with Edmund, and Edmund had mentioned that his mother was also in the East Wing, and had asked, again, whether she might say hello to Daniel, and Daniel had considered it for a day, and then said yes. He had not told his mother until afterward. He had wanted to do it on his own terms, without the additional weight of Clara's history with that woman in the room. Margaret Carr was smaller than he had imagined. This was the first thing he noticed. He had built up a particular image of her in his mind over the past weeks, partly from what Adeze had told him and partly from what his mother had told him, and partly from the weight that her decision had given to the story of his life. The image he had built was of someone correspondingly large, imperious, certain, occupying more space than an ordinary person. She was a small woman in her 80s with white hair and old hands, sitting in a chair by a window in a well-furnished room, and she looked at him when he came in, with eyes that were Edmund's eyes, at a different age and angle. He sat across from her. She studied him for a moment. "You look like him," she said. It was a statement of fact, offered without apparent emotion. "I know," he said. A pause. "Your mother," she said. "Is she well?" "She is," he said. "She is here, in the city." "Yes." Margaret looked at her hands for a moment, then she looked back up at him. "I made a decision 19 years ago," she said. "I made it because I believed it was the correct decision, and I would not have believed it was incorrect until very recently, which tells you something about the kind of certainty I had operated with." She paused. "I am telling you this, not because I expect it to mean anything to you. I am telling you because I think you deserve directness, and because I am too old to be indirect about things that matter." Daniel looked at her steadily. "What do you want from this meeting?" he asked. She was quiet for a moment. "I want to see you," she said. "That is all. I wanted to see who you are. I owe you that much. Or rather, you are owed that much, and I am in the position of being the one who owes it." He considered this. "I am an engineering student," he said. "My mother is a teacher. I grew up in a small house in a town 2 hours south of here. I know how to fix a car, and how to bake bread, and how to read a structural diagram. I came first in mathematics in my secondary school, and fourth in my year in my university entrance examinations." He paused. "I did not know who my father was until 6 weeks ago. I have not found that I needed the knowledge, exactly. My mother gave me everything I needed, but I am glad, now, to have it." Margaret Carr looked at him. "You are very direct," she said. "Yes," he said. "That is not something you got from your mother," she said. Clara was thoughtful about when she used directness. This kind, using it as a first tool rather than a last one. "This you got from our side." Daniel looked at her. "Our side," he said. She met his eyes. "Yes," she said. "Whether I earned the right to say it or not." A silence. Daniel stood. "I should go," he said. "Edmund is waiting." She nodded. She did not ask him to stay. She did not perform any feeling she might have had about the shortness of the visit. She simply nodded, which he found, in a strange way, respectful. He moved toward the door. "Daniel," she said. He turned. She looked at him across the room. This young man who had grown up without the things her decision had taken from him, who had come in and sat across from her and said his piece, and was going without drama and without performance. "I am sorry," she said. "For what it is worth, from the source it is coming from." He looked at her for a moment. "I heard you," he said, and he left. He told Edmund about it after their tea. Edmund listened without interrupting. "How was it?" Edmund asked. Daniel thought about it. "She was honest," he said. "More honest than I expected. She did not ask me to understand or forgive. She just looked at me and said what she wanted to say." "She can be that way," Edmund said. The honesty was always there. The problem was that it operated inside a very narrow understanding of what was right. "Yes," Daniel said. "I saw that." They were quiet for a moment. "Will you tell your mother?" Edmund asked. "Yes," Daniel said. "Tonight." Edmund nodded. They sat for a while in the reading room, with the books on 3 walls and the window looking east, and the afternoon came toward its end, and the light did what the northern light did at this hour, which was to become something almost unbearably beautiful for a short time before it faded. "I have been thinking," Edmund said. "Yes?" "About what this looks like, going forward, the shape of it." He looked at Daniel. "I do not want to put something on you that you have not asked for, but I also do not want to keep you at a distance because managing it at a distance is easier. You are my son, and I would like to know you properly, not in occasional meetings with George Ola hovering near the door." Daniel was quiet. "I am not looking for a title or a position," he said. "I want to be clear about that." "I know you are not," Edmund said. "I am not talking about that. I am talking about something simpler. Dinner, sometimes. Conversations that are not structured like official meetings. The chance to know my daughters, when everyone is ready for that. The chance to know your mother, properly, as someone who deserves to be known and not managed." He paused. "I am talking about family, in whatever imperfect and non-standard shape we are able to build it." Daniel looked at him. That is what I would like, he said, in time. Yes, Edmund said, in time. They sat together as the light faded, and the east turned dark, and the reading room became warm in the lamplight, and neither of them said anything more for a while, because there was nothing more that needed to be said that evening, and both of them understood, in the particular way that they shared, that some things were more useful to sit with than to discuss. Outside, the northern city moved through its evening. People closed their shops and went home. The streetlights came on. The park near the small flat on the third floor was dark and quiet. In the flat, Clara Ashe sat at the kitchen table, with a cup of tea, and the photographs she had brought from home, which she had arranged on the kitchen windowsill, because she needed something familiar in the space. Daniel at 5, Daniel at 16, and one more, which she had found at the bottom of the box when she was packing, a photograph she had not looked at in years, taken at a university gathering on an October afternoon, 20 years ago. A young woman laughing, turned slightly to one side, entirely herself. She looked at it for a long moment. She did not cry, and she did not put it away. She set it on the windowsill with the others, and she sat at the table, and she drank her tea, and she let the evening be what it was. The story did not end the way stories in books end. There was no single moment of resolution, no afternoon where all the people gathered in one room, and everything was acknowledged, and the wounds were healed, and the future arrived wearing a clean face. What there was, instead, was the accumulation of smaller things. The ordinary work of people choosing, each day, to be honest with each other, and to move toward difficulty rather than away from it. The kind of progress that does not feel like progress when you are inside it, because it is simply the practice of continuing to show up. Daniel finished his first year of engineering with strong marks, and spent part of the summer in the capital. He had dinner with Edmund 3 times that summer, and on the third occasion Nora was also there, and the 4 of them, Edmund, Nora, Daniel, and Clara, who had come up for the week, sat around a table in the smaller dining room of the palace, and ate a meal that George Ola had spent considerable quiet effort arranging to be as informal as a meal in a palace could be. It was not without discomfort. These were people whose lives had been shaped by the same event in very different ways, and the event was present in the room with them, even when no one was speaking about it directly. Nora was careful in a way that told you she was managing something, and Clara was measured in a way that told you the same thing. Edmund was quieter than usual. Daniel was very much himself, which is to say, he was direct and attentive, and asked questions that moved the conversation forward whenever it threatened to stop. But they sat at the table for 2 hours, and by the end of the 2 hours the discomfort had lowered by several degrees, and when Nora said something that made Clara laugh, a genuine laugh, unexpected, the laugh of someone who had been caught off guard by something actually funny, something shifted in the room that had not been there before. It was not warmth exactly, not yet, but it was the first visible possibility of warmth, the first evidence that the people at this table were capable of being in the same room in a way that was not only about management and history and the careful navigation of something difficult. Amara met Daniel that summer too. She had arranged it herself, had told her father she was ready, and had told Daniel through Edmund's staff that she would like to meet him if he was willing, and Daniel had said he was willing. They had coffee at the university canteen near where Daniel was working on a summer project, which was her suggestion and a good one, a neutral space, not a palace room, not anywhere that carried official weight. They were very similar in certain ways that became apparent quickly, both of them direct, both of them inclined to say what they thought rather than what they supposed was expected, both of them comfortable with silence in a way that tended to unnerve people who were not. They had talked for an hour and a half, and at the end Amara had said, "This was less awkward than I thought it would be." "Yes," Daniel had said. "We should do it again," she said. "Yes," he said. And they had. They had met for coffee twice more before the end of the summer, and the coffee had lasted longer each time, and by the third meeting, they were doing something that looked, from the outside, very much like 2 people simply talking. Isabel, who was 12 and had the social instincts of someone twice her age, had met Daniel at one of the family dinners. She had looked at him across the table with her sharp, warm eyes, and then asked him, completely without preamble, whether he could help her with her science homework, because her teacher did not explain things in a way that made sense, and everyone said he was studying engineering, and she needed someone to explain kinetic energy. Daniel had looked at her for a moment. Then he had said, "After dinner." And after dinner, he had sat with Isabel at the side table, with her notebook, while the adults talked, and he had explained kinetic energy in 3 different ways, until she found the one that made sense to her, and then she had done her homework, in about 15 minutes, and closed her notebook, with the satisfaction of someone who has just solved something that was bothering her. "You're a good teacher," she had told him. "I have a good teacher's example to follow," he had said. She had considered this. "Your mum?" she said. "My mum," he said. "I would like to meet her properly," Isabel said. "Not at a dinner, at something less formal." Daniel had looked across the room to where Clara was speaking with Nora, and the 2 women were talking carefully but genuinely, with the slightly stilted ease of people who are discovering that they have more in common than the situation alone would suggest. "I think that can be arranged," he had said. It had been arranged. It was another small thing, easily described. A Saturday afternoon, a walk in the park near the flat, Isabel and Clara and Daniel, the city autumn, already coming in with its particular northern sharpness. But the small things were the real things. The small things were what the large things were made of. Clara had gone home to her town eventually. She had gone back to the school where she had worked for 15 years, to the kitchen with the clock on the wall, and the photographs in the hallway. She had called Adaeze the night she arrived home, and they had talked for an hour about everything that had happened, and everything that was still happening. "How does it feel?" Adaeze had asked. "To have been there, to have come back." Clara had thought about it for a moment. "Like something that was very tight has been given room," she said. "Not solved, not fixed, just given more room to breathe." "That is enough," Adaeze said. "For now." "Yes," Clara said. "For now." Edmund, for his part, found that the changes in his life since the ceremony were not all external. Some of the most significant ones were internal, adjustments in how he understood the relationship between his public obligations and his private life, between the architecture of the territory's governance and the ordinary human life that had always existed alongside it. He had always been good at the territory. He was less certain that he had always been as honest as he should have been about the ways in which the territory could become a reason not to look at other things, the way that duty could be used, if you were not careful, as a place to put the things that were too difficult to face directly. He had begun to be more careful about that. He had told George Ola, near the end of that summer, that he wanted to restructure certain aspects of how decisions were made in the palace, specifically, the way that information was managed and filtered before it reached him. He wanted more direct access to uncomfortable truths, he said, and fewer people in the chain between the truth and his desk. George Ola had looked at him with the expression of someone who was deeply unsurprised. "That would be a good change," George had said. "I thought you might think so," Edmund said. Nora and Edmund talked more that year than they had talked in several years before it. This was something Nora had noticed and named, one evening when they were sitting in the smaller sitting room after their daughters had gone to bed. "You are more present than you were," she said. She said it not as a complaint about the before, but as an observation about the now. "I think I have been reminded of something," he said, "that the things that matter most are not always the things that require the most management. Sometimes they are the things that simply require you to be there." She looked at him. "You are not quoting someone," she said. "That is something you have thought yourself." "Yes," he said. "I like it," she said. He had smiled. It was a real smile, the kind that arrived before he decided to produce it. The matter of Margaret Carr settled, over the following months, into something that was not exactly repaired, but was at least honest. Edmund visited her regularly. She was aging faster than she had been, in the way that people sometimes age faster when they have stopped holding themselves in a particular kind of tension. She did not become soft exactly, but she became less defended, and in the space where the defense had been, something more real moved in. She had asked Edmund, once, whether Clara had spoken of her. "Yes," he had said. "Without bitterness?" she asked. "With something more complicated than bitterness," he said. "With understanding, I think. And with the particular strength of someone who decided a long time ago that she was not going to let what happened to her define what kind of person she was going to be." Margaret had been quiet for a moment. She should not have been put in a position that required that kind of strength, Margaret had said. "No," Edmund had said. "She should not have." A silence. I know that, Margaret said. I have known it for a while. I am sorry it has taken this long to say it properly. He had nodded. He had not offered her the forgiveness that was not his to give. He had simply said, yes. It has taken a long time, and then they had sat together in the room in the East Wing, and he had told her about a conversation he had had with Daniel about the history of the northern coast, and she had listened, and the afternoon had moved through its hours the way afternoons do, with the ordinary indifference to what is required of them. In his second year at university, Daniel became friends with a wider group of people who knew who his father was, and people who did not, and the two groups coexisted without Daniel making any particular issue of it in either direction. He lived in university accommodation. He worked hard on his degree. He called his mother on Sunday evenings and his father on Thursday mornings, and Adaeze, when he needed someone to talk to who had the particular quality of listening that Adaeze had developed over 40 years of practice. He had met Margaret Carr twice more. The meetings were short and honest, in the way that meetings between people who do not have much sentiment between them are honest. He did not seek warmth from her, and she did not perform warmth she did not have. But there was a form of acknowledgement between them that was real, and he valued it for what it was, rather than regretting what it was not. He had not, he sometimes thought, fully processed the entirety of what had happened. There were things he would not finish processing for years. The loss of the years themselves, not in a dramatic way, not as a wound that prevented him from functioning, but as a simple fact. There were years that could not be recovered, and those years had shaped him in ways that might have been different, and the different shape would have been neither better nor worse, just different. He would not know who the other version of him would have been. He carried this the way you carry most things that cannot be resolved, not always, not heavily, but with the honest acknowledgement that it was there. His mother, who knew him better than anyone, had once said to him, "The loss is real. You do not have to make it smaller than it is." "I know," he had said. "But you also do not have to let it be the biggest thing in the room," she had said. "I know that too," he had said. "Good," she had said. And then she had asked him whether he had eaten, and he had said yes, and she had said good, because she had been worried about whether the university canteen food was adequate, and the conversation had moved on, and the loss had taken its place among the other facts of his life, present, acknowledged, real, and no longer in the way. Adaeze, in her study, had taken the small photograph of Clara from its half-hidden position behind the conference photograph and moved it to the center of the wall, where it caught the light properly. She had looked at it on a quiet morning, with her tea, and she had felt the peace that she had first felt on the morning after the ceremony, the peace of something held too long finally being released. She was 71 years old. She had practiced her craft for 4 decades. She had learned, across those decades, that the body kept records of everything, of the things it had been given and the things it had been denied, of the truths it had carried and the truths it had been prevented from speaking. She had learned that the keeping of secrets had a cost, even when the keeping was done from love, and she had learned that the cost was not only to the person keeping the secret, but to everyone in the orbit of the truth that was being held. She had spoken 4 words. She had changed the shape of several lives. She was, in the quiet of her study, with the morning light coming in and the photographs on the wall looking back at her, entirely at peace with what she had done. Not because everything had been resolved. It had not been resolved. Resolution was a word that belonged to stories that had been finished, and this story had not been finished. It was a story that had been given the room to continue, which was different. The people in it were still figuring out what it meant to be in each other's lives. They were still negotiating the shapes of things. They were still learning how to be honest with each other in ways that were new to all of them. But they were doing it in the open now. They were doing it with each other's names known and their histories present and the light coming in. And that, Adaeze thought, as she set her tea down and looked at the photograph of Clara laughing on the wall, was what the truth was for. Not to make things simple, not to make things painless, not to resolve what 19 years of distance and silence had built between people who had belonged to each other, but to make things possible, to give the story back to the people it belonged to let them carry it in the open, where it could breathe. 4 words. That child is yours. 4 words, and then the silence in the room, and then everything that silence had made room for, the conversations, the meetings, the afternoon walks in the garden, the dinners that started awkward and grew less so, The coffee at the university canteen. The kinetic energy explained to a 12-year-old with sharp eyes. The photograph moved from a half-hidden corner to the center of a wall. The mother and son at the kitchen table in the flat near the park. The father and son in the reading room, with the books on 3 walls and the light coming in from the east. The small things, the ordinary things, the things that could not be manufactured or rushed or managed. The real things, which had always been there, waiting for the room.